So before we start on this video, I just want you to know my cats get lunch at 2 o'clock and they're very concerned about the idea that we might forget when they're supposed to get lunch. So it's 1:27 right now. You're gonna hear them yelling at me. What's up, friends? I am back with another Purging My Shelves video. It has been a very, very long time since I've done one of these. And I'm not even coming back with the one that y'all asked for me to do next, but that's my prerogative as the creator. If you haven't seen any of my purging videos before, the concept is basically that I'm rereading books on my shelves that I either remember not liking or don't remember at all. The end goal is to either unhaul the books that I've held on to for way too long or rediscover books that I actually like. Last time I did one of these, I said that the next Purging My Shelves video would be books that I've kept just because they're pretty, but I'm feeling more of a classics vibe right now, so that's what we're gonna do. And the first book that I'll be reading for it is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. In case you haven't heard of this story, it follows an orphan girl named Anne who was adopted by an older couple who actually wanted to adopt a boy. This is kind of a coming of age story where we're following Anne as she grows up. According to Goodreads, I gave this book 3 stars. Makes sense because I often don't like books that are just following someone's life versus having a coherent traditional plot of like rising action, climax, and all of that stuff. But some booktubers that I really respect love this book, so I'll give it a shot, and if nothing else, I've reread the source material for Anne with an E and I can watch that show. Next we've got Anthem by Ayn Rand, which I also gave 3 stars to back in 2013. I unhauled one of her other books, Fountainhead I think, without even reading it. Now that I'm looking at this, wasn't there something about Ayn Rand being kind of a bad person? Okay, never mind. We're not gonna bother with this one. Straight unhaul, we're already off to a great start. Next, The Beautiful and the Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. We all know this guy is an asshole, but I happened to read this book back in 2020 when I was still unemployed and living off of my savings. And while I wasn't, a couple living above my means, spending money they don't really have on a life of decadence and luxury, all whilst waiting for someone else to conveniently die and leave them an inheritance, still hit different at the time, That's what this story basically is. It's following Anthony and Gloria, who are like a nouveau riche couple in New York in the 1920s in a truly reckless marriage. And lucky us, we have a front row seat to their destruction. Back in 2020, I gave it 3 stars. I don't have higher hopes than that this time around. If anything, I think it's gonna get less than 3 stars because now I'm just not in the same situation. I don't think I'm gonna relate to it as much as I did back then. Now we are moving on to 2 classics that I remember actively hating. The first one is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Goodreads says that I read this in 2015 and that I gave it 4 stars, and that feels impossible to me. All I remember was thinking that the writing was an ordeal to get through and that everyone was unnecessarily pretentious and angsty, but I gave it 4 stars. So maybe it's actually better than I remember it now, and maybe now that I'm older, maybe I'll be okay with the writing and understand it a bit more instead of writing everyone off. For those who don't know, Wuthering Heights is a gothic, somewhat romance novel revolving around Heathcliff, who was adopted by a well-off family, fell in love with a daughter but was ultimately spurned, and then shot back down to the status of a servant. And from what I remember, just spent the rest of his life seeking revenge on this family and specifically on the daughter who he originally fell in love with. I don't know. I remember actively hating it, but looking back on these books, this one and Anne of Green Gables are the only ones that I'm kind of hopeful about. Now for the last book. We've got The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. If you've watched a lot of my videos, you may know my feelings about this book. I loathe this book. I have no good memories of this book at all. When someone asks me what book I would get rid of in the entire world, I think of this one with no hesitation. Is that an overstatement? Is that a little bit rude to the book? Probably. I don't care. I hated it. It made my life miserable for the entire month that it took me to read it. On Goodreads, I gave it 1 star, and I remember being so irritated by the narrator, and the only concession that I will give to Catcher in the Rye is that, in its own defense, I read it in middle school. I have changed a lot more. I have gone through more things in my life now. Maybe if I read it now, I'll have a bit more sympathy for the narrator. Maybe I'll be kinder to it. If I end up giving this a good rating, that's character growth right there. Catcher in the Rye is a coming-of-age story surrounding Holden Caulfield, who runs away from his preparatory school and wanders around New York City for a few days. I vaguely remember that he also endured a lot of trauma and was dealing with grief throughout the book, but I don't remember much beyond that and the word phony. I literally cannot hear the word phony without thinking of Catcher in the Rye, and that simply ruins my day. I'm getting heated about this, and it's only the introduction. Let me just put that down. This one's not gonna be a good time, y'all. Hopefully by the time you're getting to this, you have seen some B-roll. I don't know, I'm not very good at B-roll, but it's a goal of mine to get better at it. Maybe one day I can achieve like Stephanie Bookish levels of B-roll, but I also don't leave my house, so at what point will I get anything beyond the same desk, couch, whatever? I'm not interesting. But you're here for books. Thankfully, you're not here for me, you're here for books. I decided to start with Anne of Green Gables. I'm less than halfway through. I think I'm about 90 pages in, and it's going okay. I don't really know how to explain this, but this book is a lot more fun if I read it in an old-timey Southern accent. And I'm talking like USA Southern accent, even though this was written and takes place in Canada. I'm sorry, I don't know what the Southern equivalent of a Canadian accent would be, but reading it with an accent makes it more fun. Otherwise, I think I would get exasperated by a lot of the ramblings in this book because, boy, Anne sure goes on. And so do some of the descriptions. I'll admit, I'm fonder of this than I thought I would be. Even with a lot of the rambling descriptions of nature and everything like that, there are times where I find it kind of peaceful and I'm kind of jealous that I can't see the things that's being described in this book. And I have a little bit of a soft spot for Anne. She's a really sweet girl. I feel like my life would probably be better if I had the perspective that she has on life and seeing the beauty in nature and everything. There's definitely something that can be gotten out of this book. And there's more humor to this book than I remember there being. So I have a better impression of this so far than what I remember having. I'm just not a fan of following someone's everyday life. Unless I'm already attached to them, like I read a whole series about this character and then a novella gets released where we're just following their everyday life, then that's okay because I already love the character, but we're just thrown into Anne's life and Marilla's life and all of that. I don't have an attachment to them. I don't care about them. So why should I care about their everyday life? And it's not helped by the fact that this feels very much like it's of the era of moral literature. I'm sure there's an actual phrase for it. I don't know if moral literature is what it's called, but Little Women is the best example I can think of what I'm trying to describe here. Although I'm pretty sure Anne of Green Gables and Little Women were published far apart, maybe 50, 60 years apart from each other. Little Women is a book where the main purpose of it, at least what it felt like to me, was to convey morals to children or young women through a story. Obviously, there was a story, you were following these characters and the author wanted you to care about the characters in Little Women, but it all felt like a vehicle for teaching certain morals. And in a similar way, Anne of Green Gables, I feel like, is teaching or attempting to teach me morals as they're being taught to Anne. Like, it really just feels like the author wants me to be a morally upstanding Sunday school girl, just like Marilla wants Anne to be a morally upstanding Sunday school girl. And I'm not vibing with that because one, I'm too old to be taught morals in the way that Anne is being taught morals in this book, which fair enough, she's like 11 or 12. But also two, these morals have an outdated foundation because it's all predicated on being a good Christian, and that's not the basis for being a moral person. So I can understand why people would like this and why people would be so attached to Anne because, again, she has a very lovely perspective on things. And there's actually a line that I bookmarked because I felt like it was a good example of Anne's view on life and how there are certain lessons to be taught. "Oh, Marilla, looking forward to things is half the pleasure of them," exclaimed Anne. "You mayn't get the things themselves, but nothing can prevent you from having the fun of looking forward to them. Mrs. Lynde says, 'Blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed.' But I think it would be worse to expect nothing than to be disappointed." And I think that's a lovely thought. I also think it's really nice how Anne romanticizes life. She goes way too far with it, in my opinion. But it's nice to add a little bit of romance to your life. And I really appreciate that. I'm conflicted, is what I'm saying. Also, we just got the introduction of Gilbert. I guess minor spoiler, so I'll put in a little time card here if you don't want any of the plot. But Gilbert has just been introduced, and if I'm remembering correctly, I think Gilbert is supposed to be Anne's love interest towards the end of the book. I'm not here for it. I don't know if I was here for it last time when I read this. He's 14 years old, whilst Anne and all of her peers are like 11 or 12 years old. I'm not sure how old they are right now. And he pinned a 12-year-old girl's braid to her chair so sturdily that when she stood up, she felt like her hair was getting ripped out by the roots. No. And he also teases Anne. This is boys will be boys, isn't it? I don't like the image or the idea that boys will tease girls that they like or something like that, and that girls should just accept it. He literally hurt this poor little 12-year-old girl. She started crying. No, I'm not here for it. Anne's response to him was very dramatic in, breaking the chalkboard slat over his head, but I was pleased to see it. I hope y'all don't mind the lighting or essentially getting the same angle every single day, but if you see updates in any of my kind of vlog style videos, guaranteed the majority of them are filmed right after I get off work. So lighting's bad, my hair's probably bad, I'm looking rough. I will say though, as you may have already seen, I did make brownies today, so today's a better day. Not having such a good day with Anne of Green Gables, though. I did finish this book, and apparently L.M. Montgomery is a minister's wife, and let me tell you, that checks out. I'm having a hard time. My feelings are still lackluster. It's like my heart wants to love Anne of Green Gables, but my brain is telling me, but you don't love it. This book all the way through just felt like a series of short stories following the same characters, and as I've mentioned before, short stories just don't do it for me. I don't form an attachment to the people. The stories typically end right when I'm getting invested in it, so it's not a good time. They're not long enough for me to get invested and interested in what's going on. And that's for the ones that have like an actual plot line and some intrigue to them, which I feel like Anne of Green Gables lacks in general. So I just don't care enough about these characters to go through the everyday with them. I go through the everyday with myself. So unless someone's life is vastly different from mine and interesting, I don't want to do that. That being said, and this is where the conflict comes in, there are some themes and concepts in Anne of Green Gables that I really, really like. I love that Anne is an ambitious girl with intentions of going to higher education, especially because this is during a time where higher education was seen as unsuitable for ladies. So I really appreciate that there is a book for young girls where ambition and education, having goals, is such a major character trait. And I love even more that Anne absolutely 100% has ADHD. That of everything in this book is the most interesting thing to me, to be honest, because it's seeing what people today try to argue is a modern problem so clearly described in a book that was written in the early 1900s, I think, maybe like 1902. And we're seeing it in a girl. Like even today, it's so hard for girls to get diagnosed with ADHD because it presents differently from the way it presents in boys, or there are biases in medicine. But here we have a girl in the 1900s who has ADHD so clearly that when I went to Google it, it auto-filled for me. And what makes that even better is that those ADHD characteristics, which are considered a flaw in that time period and are even said to be a flaw in that book, is also clearly a part of Anne's charm. People love Anne for those parts of her, not in spite of those things. And I think it's lovely, and it's lovely to see people fall in love with Anne. So There are nuggets in Anne of Green Gables that I like. There are themes that I like. There are sentences that I like. I guess you'll see in the results portion of this video what I decide to do and what my rating will be, because I just don't know right now. I'm not good at making choices, and that's really the reason why I haven't unhauled books. We all have our flaws. I have also just started The Beautiful and Damned. I'm not very far in. I think I'm just into chapter 2, so Gloria, who is the wife in this story, hasn't even been introduced yet. I don't have many thoughts. I will say that the main character, Anthony, is an asshole. He's shallow and pretentious, and I get that that's the point of this book, and we're supposed to think that about him, but damn, being in his perspective, being in his mind, is painful. Also, so far, this book is yet another book where we're just following someone's life. I will give that it has a more cohesive message because it has the themes of, you know, greed and decadence and how all of that can and will lead to your destruction. But we have not gotten into those themes, so we're just following someone's life. Classics. Am I right? Hi, hello. I am popping in real quick. I'm not quite halfway through. I'm at 140 pages of 360 something, but I was already filming, so I decided to just film a quick clip. For a brief moment, I started to like this book. I started to get feelings about it because we get a little bit of Anthony and his monologue, and really this man is just a 20-something-year-old having a crisis. And as a fellow 20-something-year-old who really doesn't know what to do with her life, you know what? I get it, okay? I kind of sympathize, but my sympathy down the drain real fast. Anthony is just not a good person. He's an annoying character to be around. Neither Anthony nor Gloria are supposed to be characters that you really like or root for necessarily, but Anthony really just gives me the impression of like a trust fund baby, nice guy TM. He's so entitled in so many ways, including with the way that he treats women, in particular Gloria in the beginning of their relationship. And Gloria is not a good person either. I will say that Gloria isn't, you know, necessarily misogynistic, but she's manipulative at least. Anthony and Gloria are the OG toxic couple in literature. And I will tell you right now, if I had to be married to either of them, my blood pressure through the roof. My teeth ground to dust. My heart would be under constant stress from how frustrated I would be. Not just because they're terrible people to begin with, but also because they both have specific things that they do that are my pet peeve. Gloria's attitude towards laundry, for instance, and the fact that she just leaves it everywhere and doesn't clean up after herself or do the things that she said she was gonna do. Oh, I got... Anyway, I'm mad. And looking back on it and seeing the way Gloria and Anthony act and the fact that I sympathized with that and that this spoke to me says a lot about my mental state at that time. Because Anthony and Gloria are freeloaders, essentially. They're entitled. They think that everything should be done for them, that the world should revolve around them. They basically just wait around and hope that things will fall into place, that other people will take care of them and make decisions for them and tell them what they should do with their life. And at the time that I read this book, it was in 2020. I still didn't have a job because, lucky me, I graduated a few months into the pandemic when the job market was just at a terrible point and it was so hard to even hear back from people. So I was really down. And even back then, I wouldn't have said that I was a freeloader or anything like that because I had savings, I was contributing to my household, but it made me feel really bad about myself that I wasn't bringing in any income. I understand why it emotionally touched me, but I think it emotionally touched me because I wasn't in a good mental state. And now that I'm in a healthier place, I don't feel emotionally connected to this anymore. So I guess that's good. Can you believe that I went all the way to DC this weekend and I didn't film a single clip? Prime vlogging material, and I did not even think about it. What I did think about is getting bangs. So you might see me with bangs in this video. I put it in my head and I've already consulted my 3 closest friends and all of them agree that this is a good idea. A little teaser for the future. Anyway, In more depressing news, I have finished The Beautiful and Damned. I am less conflicted about this book than I am about Anne of Green Gables, but I am similarly disappointed about it. My initial impression of this book was that it's not a book that I want to read, but it is a book that I could write an entire English paper about. There are a lot of interesting themes in this book that kind of transcend the time period. That's why I felt so connected to it when I read it in 2020. I feel like a lot of people who read this book can and would feel seen, I guess. Not in a good way. Nobody wants to see themselves in this. Something that I really love seeing in books is kind of a gradual descent into madness. And that's what we got here. We really saw the decay of these characters and their marriage specifically. But there are other things about this book that just couldn't and shouldn't be ignored, namely racism and sexism. Now, with classics, I often find myself saying, that they're a product of their time. And what I mean when I say that is that the author maybe uses phrasing or words that are not good and they're indicators of racism or sexism, but they don't mean that maliciously. It's just the way that people spoke back in the day. That's not meant to forgive it or anything, but it kind of gives you the slimmest hope that the author is not a terrible person. They're just an uneducated person, someone with not a lot of perspective. That is not the case here. This is not just a product of its time. The characters and the author by extension are just blatantly racist and sexist. There are also some instances of anti-Semitism, and every single time it's unnecessary. It doesn't add to the plot. It doesn't add to the characterizations either. It doesn't say anything about the characters besides the fact that they're racist and sexist, and that has nothing to do with the themes of this book. There's no message to any of it, so it just detracts from the story. It's annoying to read through. It's exhausting and infuriating to read some of the things that they say about people of color or about women. It's just so frustrating because this could have been a good character study. I'm like actually kind of angry here. I'll reserve my rating for the end results because I'm waffling between two different ratings, but rest assured, this book is getting unhauled. Now, I think I'm gonna move on to Wuthering Heights. So I just opened up Wuthering Heights and the dust jacket is folded in on page 2. Does that mean that I started this book at some point and DNF'd it at page 2? I don't know, and I really hope that's not the case, otherwise that's a bad sign. This is not a reading update. I'm like halfway through Wuthering Heights, just under, so I'll update you later about that. It's going well. I'm here to say that, remember those bangs that I mentioned earlier? Turns out my hairdresser has an appointment today. We're getting bangs. Got the idea to get bangs on Sunday, and now here we are on Wednesday, and it's happening. We love impulse decisions. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about this. And I present to you bangs. I like it. Wuthering Heights. I'm not quite 50% of the way through. I would say maybe 40% of the way through. And this is going pretty well. I can see why I gave it 4 stars. I don't know why I got the impression that this book was really difficult to read. Like the language was very difficult to get through. Granted, I was younger when I read it the last time, but I think I read it when I was 17, and that's plenty old enough for me to have been fine with it. This is probably one of the easier classics to read. This really is just an angsty book full of horrible people. I feel like a lot of people consider this a romance book, and I can understand why. There's one passage where Catherine, Heathcliff's main love, is talking about Heathcliff, and yes, that I felt was very romantic in a messed up kind of way, but it was very romantic. But beyond that one scene, which was like a page, 2 pages or something, this isn't a romance book. It's absolutely a book about revenge. Heathcliff is a terrible person. Catherine is a terrible person. The only concession I will give is that I understand why they became terrible people. Neither of them had good parenting. It went from just poor, absent parenting to straight up abuse. So I understand why they turned out to be shitty people. Catherine being very spoiled and selfish and manipulative, and then Heathcliff being a lot of the same, but wow, just wow. Heathcliff did go through a lot more than Catherine did, though, in my opinion. I mentioned in the synopsis that he got adopted by Catherine's family. The scene where he arrived at the house after being adopted, they treated Heathcliff so grossly. They were just so racist. They called him an it. They treated him like an animal. They spit at him. Dude, why are people in classics so casually and cruelly racist? And as a warning, this isn't just racist towards black people. It very specifically uses the racial slur for Romani people several times. So keep that in mind if you want to avoid that. So many classics are just full of racism with no purpose. See The Beautiful and the Damned. This one, I think, has more of a purpose to it because it's used to heap abuse on Heathcliff and show why he turned out to be the person that he turned out to be. I don't know that that's a good enough reason to include it, and I don't know that you would want to read this because of that. What? And honestly, if I were Heathcliff, I kind of get it. I kind of get wanting to get revenge on the people who contributed the most to your abuse. However, he's a terrible person because of the way he goes about it. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all that he's choosing to get revenge on those people through other people. And his actions are now abusive on their own. He went from being the person that was abused to now being an abuser. And that's tragic. I'm having an okay time. I don't feel like avoiding the book, so that's a good sign. So my boyfriend has a meeting right now, so I've retreated to the bedroom, not the best lighting condition. Y'all will have to live with it. But I finished Wuthering Heights, and you know what? I'm actually considering keeping this one. Wuthering Heights is a little bit as if Edgar Allan Poe had written Pride and Prejudice, but not as good as either one, because I love both of them and Wuthering Heights doesn't quite measure up to that. But it does have some similar romantic elements. You know, you have two love interests from different social statuses that are compatible, but their relationship is just completely destroyed before the potential has been realized because of their own pride and whatever, getting in the middle of it. Except Pride and Prejudice is just two people who, you know, made some rash judgments or whatever, and they got over that and they're good. Wuthering Heights is full of awful, awful people. They're manipulative and they're cruel and they're selfish and they are just about every bad characteristic that you can think of, up to and including abuse. If they felt so inclined, I'm sure that they would commit cold-blooded murder. But I'm sure that that's the way Emily Bronte intended for this book to come across and intended for these characters to come across, and that's why I'm tempted to keep it. Because I respect when a book comes across exactly the way that the author intended for it to come across. I don't think she intended for this to be a romance book, and honestly, I feel a little bit concerned for people who consider it a romance novel and market it as such. Yes, there are some romantic elements, like I mentioned. I can see why some people would consider certain scenes to be romantic in a very toxic and tragic way, but even the scenes that I think are somewhat romantic and are very passionate is like, I don't know, 5% of the book maybe. And honestly, if you recognize your own relationship in any of the couples, you need to reevaluate. I don't know, sometimes it's just nice to read about terrible people. So I'm not opposed to keeping Wuthering Heights. I think the question more so now is whether or not I enjoyed Wuthering Heights enough to warrant the space that it takes up on my bookshelf. Whew. And all that leaves is Catcher in the Rye. You need to get your butt out of my chair. You neither pay rent nor you paid for this chair. It's mine. Alright, y'all, so we have gotten to the last update clip of this vlog because I just finished Catcher in the Rye. I didn't update you in the midway point. As you saw from the clips, I did end up traveling. I went home to see my mom for like the first time in almost 2 years, so that was very exciting. But I did intend to finish Catcher in the Rye before I did that, and I didn't because I avoided it for so long and I really didn't want to read it, so I just read it on the plane. And you know what? At first I was thinking, this isn't so horrible. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but it's not so horrible. Maybe, Jess, just maybe, you were a little harsh in your judgment. I wasn't. I was not too harsh in my judgment. Maybe a little bit, but I was pretty close. Holden's inner narrative is so annoying. It's so... And I was bearing with it for like maybe 20-ish pages. And then there was like a shocking mention of rape. Right in the beginning, where he's mentioning his roommate and he's talking about how his roommate is really good with the girls and how he pressures girls in the back of the car and keeps going on and having sex with them, even while they're actively saying the words, "No, stop." And Holden said he wishes he could do the same thing. Oh my God. It got bad, but it only got worse from there somehow. I wouldn't say any of the things in this book are very graphic, so I think anyone would be fine reading it, but I do see how it could be triggering for people because of the way that they talk about women. Holden is so gross, so misogynistic. He's judgmental of everyone, but he's very judgmental of women specifically, and that is so... He's just so gross. There's one scene where he forces a kiss on a girl while she is actively sobbing. Like, something about her sobbing was just so attractive to him. I just can't. I can't with this kid. Being in Holden's head was nauseating. And I don't want to hear any of the defenders of this book saying, oh, like, you just don't get it. Like, that's totally the point. Like, you just didn't catch on to the fact that he's mentally ill. Or that I didn't understand that part of it is that he's meant to be an unlikable character and he's a hypocrite and I don't want to hear it. I get it. I understand what the author tried to do, but it went too far. Like, honestly, a part of me feels bad. I want to feel sympathy for Holden because he went through a lot of trauma. He's dealing with depression and PTSD, I think. He's going through a hard time, and that sucks. But his personality is awful down to the core. And having trauma does not excuse someone being racist or classist or misogynistic or a whole host of other terrible personality traits that Holden has. Because being mentally ill doesn't make you a terrible person. And I'm not going to forgive this for age either, because I remember being like, 16 or 17, and I wasn't that shitty. And no one that I hung out with was that terrible either. It was frustrating. There were like itsy bitsy little nuggets of what this book could have been were it not for this kid's personality. There's this one passage where Holden is talking about his views and his feelings about war and how he would hate to be in the army. And I did think that was a really interesting passage to read because I looked up J.D. Salinger to get a little bit of his history. And J.D. Salinger was in the army and he did go to war. So chapter 22 and onwards is a little bit better. We're getting a little bit more focus on mental health issues versus all of the other things. And the whole book should have been like that. I could have dealt with Holden being annoying if he at least wasn't downright horrible. If the whole book was a little bit more like chapter 22 and onwards, I could have dealt with it. I could have dealt with it. Screw this book. I was justified in hating it all along. And now that I have finished the last book, we might as well get on to my ratings of each and which ones I'm keeping. Obviously, I'm getting rid of Catcher in the Rye. This is finally being purged from my life and you cannot pay me enough to read it again. The only positive thing is that I did bump up the rating from 1 star to 2 stars because of the brief discussion on war and because the latter part of the book was a little bit better. This honestly could have been such an interesting look into mental health and the more sad, more broken side of it because we get an interesting progression. You see Holden become more depressed and unstable as he goes throughout the events of the story. And you see him having a mental breakdown, and there are interesting theories teased at throughout the story on the loss of innocence and why Holden is so obsessed with that idea. You know, the way he clings to innocence and authenticity and everything like that. Could have been a really interesting discussion, but it's just so bogged down by everything else. Any good that was in this book was like 3 drops of water in a whole desert, okay? It just wasn't worth it. It did nothing. And it was so little that instead of giving any sort of satisfaction, it somehow made everything worse because it was a slight taste of what could have been, and instead it was the most irritating and frustrating thing I have read recently. So I'm getting rid of it, and I've never been happier. I am also getting rid of The Beautiful and Damned. I can't remember my original rating. I think it was 4 stars, but I'm giving it 3 stars now. I like the general concepts discussed about how greed and vanity can destroy you. I like seeing things crumble in a realistic way, whether that be, you know, someone's mental stability, relationships, what have you. And it was very realistically done in this book, but all of the characters are pretty one-dimensional. I wasn't satisfied with the ending. Frankly, if I want to read about the themes in this book, I'm sure it's better executed in other books. Anne of Green Gables. Also going in the unhaul pile, and this is the only one that I feel a little bit bad about. I gave this 3 stars. I can understand why people love it, and I can understand why people get so attached to it. I'm sure if I had read it at the right time, it could have easily become a comfort read for me as well, but I didn't read it at the right time, and I just likely never will. I don't see myself wanting to reread Anne of Green Gables. It's sweet, and it's a good story for kids if you don't mind the heavy Christian influence, but it's an average story about an average girl's average life. If I ever change my mind, I'll just check it out from the library or even buy another copy since I don't really like this edition anyway. And all that is left is Wuthering Heights, which is the only book that I'm going to keep. I did lower the rating to 3 stars, however. It was still interesting. It's an easy classic to read, and again, I really like seeing gradual descents in stories, although this one has more of a satisfactory ending than The Beautiful and Damned. I also kind of like the narrative style of having all of the events of the story recounted to someone, although there has to be some suspension of disbelief in this story because it's very convenient that the storyteller just happened to be present at all of these events. It was entertaining. There were some passages that I can imagine wanting to read again because I really liked the dramatic way that they were written. And there we go. 3 out of 4 books. That's pretty good, especially if you count Anthem, which got thrown out of my shelves from the very beginning of the video. So I did pretty good. I'm pretty happy about this. And that is the end of this installment of Purging My Shelves. I'll probably do 1 or 2 more of these videos. I definitely want to do one where I focus on, the pretty books on my shelves that I haven't gotten rid of solely for an aesthetic reason. And if you want to make sure to get notified whenever that video goes up and whenever I have other videos going up, please make sure to subscribe. If you have any opinions on the books that I read in this video, comment below. If you don't have any opinions on these books, comment below your most hated classic. I guess you could also comment your favorite classic, but I feel like hatred brings out a little bit more passion, a little bit more drama in people, so. And I will see you in the next one.